over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Good afternoon and welcome back. During a U.S. Senate hearing about a week ago, U.S. General Michael Langley, head of the United States Africa Command, or AFRICOM, accused Burkina Faso's president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, of misusing the country's gold reserves for personal security rather than national benefit, and called for the United States to arrest him. Senator Roger Wicker, in response to Langley's unsubstantiated comment, said, quote, "You can't imagine how utterly frustrating it seems to me that this mineral-rich continent has not been able to move to a utilization of the resources to benefit the people there. After all this time, it's a puzzle that we haven't unwound," end quote. As Gil Scott-Heron said, just how blind will America be? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is a week after an attempted coup in Burkina Faso. The situation remains tense in Ouagadougou, particularly among the armed forces. What is going on in Burkina Faso and with the broader context of the Alliance of Sahel States? My guest is a writer and organizer in Baltimore and the broader Washington area. She is the field operations and membership coordinator of the Black Alliance for Peace, a member of the Black Working Class Centered Ujima People's Progress Party in Maryland, and founder of #Liberation Through Reading, providing African children with books that represent them. Erica Caines. Erica, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been a while.
It's been too long, but thank you for finding space within your incredibly busy schedule. Greatly appreciate it. Before we get to Burkina Faso, your thoughts on the story under Trump. The Justice Department is stepping away from some voting rights cases. This month, attorneys for the U.S. government took steps to drop 3 lawsuits over the rights of voters of color in southern states. Weeks earlier, the Justice Department, or Injustice Department, withdrew a request to take part in a Supreme Court oral argument for a Louisiana congressional redistricting case that some legal experts fear could further weaken the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965. Your thoughts on this here, as today we're in the 100th day of Trump Redux?
It's only been 100 days.
It feels like 100 years.
Right. The rolling back of the voting rights legislation, I think we're seeing it happen, under the Trump administration, but I do think this is something that has been a chipping away for quite some time. And obviously it poses significant risk to a democracy, I guess you want to call it here, but overall the ways that electoral fairness and racial equality has been depicted through democracy, right? This puts that whole narrative, I suppose, at risk. And then, the voting rights advocates, they warn us that scaling back any of this enforcement of legal protections, especially for racial minorities, coupled with these restrictive voting policies, will disproportionately disenfranchise voters of color, and colonized voters more specifically. But I think what this really highlights is not only the abrupt withdrawal, but just the sort of framing of these so-called rights, because this is not the only set of rights that are at risk currently under this administration. But it does go into question around the sort of validity of these rights, that if they can so swiftly be taken away, what are these rights? What are they? Do we actually have them? And I think that's why we advocate more for a people-centered human rights approach that prioritizes the dignity and the agency and of the people and the treatment of individuals, particularly colonized and marginalized groups, in both policy and legal frameworks, but then on an everyday social day-to-day way that we understand it. So the rollback of these voting rights, enforcement, it directly undermines the principle of people-centered human rights by just weakening protections for anyone, particularly racial minorities who already face systematic barriers due to no political power. So now they're just going to be ousted from political participation. And human rights should not be seen as abstract. And I think that this is what we're seeing with the rollback, that many of these rights that we understand here are abstract rights.
So overall, in terms of these first 100 days, I've been telling folks that when you look at Donald Trump's sworn oath to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic, that when you look at his attack on the Constitution through his ignoring of orders from the court, when you look at his executive orders, when you look at Doge being set up, that he actually is proving to be a domestic enemy, and that Congress abdicating their responsibilities are allowing him to do that.
Yes, they are. Even with I just seen in passing, there was the sit down or the sit in on the congressional steps. And I do think that it's these low level, surface level resistance models that really don't do anything. They do not actually, to your point, express or even uphold their job, what they're allowed to do, their title. So I do think it's a bit frustrating, because we're hearing so much about Cory Booker and the 25 hours. We're hearing about the sit-in. We're hearing about them doing press conferences, but we're not hearing about what are they voting? What are they voting for and with and whom, right? And what is the actual fight happening on the congressional floor? What
bills are they putting forward to counter the action being taken by the opposition?
None. There's no fight happening, right? But for the sake of, I think even we're in the social media model of influencers, that we're seeing politicians become that they don't actually have to take a step beyond what they're doing, so long as it looks like they're doing something and they're comfortable in the looking like they're doing something. Because we can put the sit-in, we can juxtaposition that against Schumer and his call for pushing that bill forward and throwing his hands up and saying there's absolutely nothing that could be done, only to then turn around and praise Cory Booker for 25 hours, who then turns around and supports Israel completely and fully. the very next day, after 25 hours of never mentioning Palestine in any way. So this resistance is nothing different than we've seen play out in 2016 and 2017, when we had actual people on the ground and actual people in the U.S. resisting, and the politicians attempting to take credit for it. And that's what we're seeing here. Them pretending to be the sort of leadership in this, where they have
yeah. And to Dr. Nick, why do I expect a fight within the Uniparty? Well, Nick, the fact that I'm pointing out the fact there is no fight is supporting the argument of the Uniparty. Thank you for asking that question. So, as I said in the open, U.S. General Michael Langley accused Burkina Faso's president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, of misusing the country's gold reserves for personal security rather than national benefit, to which, again, Senator Wicker responded, "You can't imagine how utterly frustrating it seems to me that this mineral-rich continent has not been able to move to a utilization of the resources to benefit the people there. After all this time, it's a puzzle that we haven't unwound." Erica, there was so much said here in so few words. Your thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts, actually, on the reporting of the AES. Personally, I've been pushing back a bit on the singling out of Traoré, because the AES is an alliance of Sahelian states that include 3 states. Mm-hmm. And the more that people single Traoré out, I do think it leaves him, or has left him, open to the type of attacks that we're not seeing so much happening in Niger, that we're not seeing so much happening throughout the AES, just specifically with him, even though we're seeing Niger get attacked in other ways on the ground, via Ukraine and etc. But the sort of yellow journalism and reporting out of Burkina Faso, I think the issue remains that there's so much news coming out of Burkina Faso, and there's so much fake news around Burkina Faso, that it's been hard for people to decipher, especially if you do not speak French. So knowing what's going on and seeing every day that they have taken steps to advance their nation, to protect their sovereignty. These are things that are actually happening. But these attempts to sort of muddle what is occurring has been a sort of mainstream media collusion with the state, with state power that we're seeing. I also think it's interesting if we think about the inception of AFRICOM and the initial role of AFRICOM. This is not dissimilar language to when they felt that they needed AFRICOM to swoop in to stop terrorism, right? Mm-hmm. And that resulted in an over 500% spike of terrorism in Africa, especially in the Sahel. And we see that Burkina Faso, or the AES more broadly, has been taking significant advancements to deter that sort of thing from happening in their country. But aside from the speculation of what's happening with the gold, there's been a lot of speculation around Burkina Faso in particular, with the intent to sort of tip away at any support for it. Because while they're talking about this gold and they're using the General Langley, there's also the questions around what is happening with the broader laws, like laws that may or may not pertain to homosexuality. And I mentioned that because this again speaks to the sort of the deceptive tactics that we're seeing occur. There was a BBC article that was written last year that misleadingly labels Burkina Faso's government, obviously they keep calling it a military junta, but then also directly tying it to Russia to then say, oh, well, yes, of course it makes sense that they would have anti-LGBTQ laws, or they would be passing laws to be criminalizing homosexuality. But there are no laws that have been passed. And they only are citing one justice minister, right? So this is akin to to Tim Kaine saying a thing and then people running with it as law, right? But it's never explained in that way. And I say that to say that even when we're hearing General Langley discuss the minerals, the issue is also the partnerships with China and Russia. Not so much that they're using the resources, but who are they partnering with these resources, or who would these resources benefit if they're excluding the U.S. and they're excluding France and they're turning to Russia and they're turning to China. So obviously the government of Burkina Faso swiftly condemned this, but I do think it highlights a sort of pattern of neocolonial overreach. Because from the inception in 2007, I think I said 2017 earlier, but from its inception, this has been the sort of narrative and follow through of AFRICOM, this sort of disregard for sovereignty, and it mirrors the media's role in legitimizing such interventions. So as we're seeing this, we have to know that there's a plan to disrupt the process of what the Alliance of Sahelian States has been able to accomplish thus far, and what it has inspired in the region.
For Senator Wicker to say he's frustrated that this mineral-rich continent has not been able to move to utilization of resources to benefit the people there, doesn't he have any understanding of colonialism? Doesn't he have any understanding of history? Or is this just ignorant settler colonial amnesia? Because when I watched that testimony and I heard Wicker say that, it just made me think about the CEO from TikTok, Xu Zi Chen, I think, or Chu, when he was talking to Cotton, and Cotton kept asking him about China, and he kept saying, "Senator, I'm Singaporean." "Well, have you ever served in the Chinese army?" "No, Senator, I'm from Singapore." "Well, don't you have a Chinese passport?" "No, Senator, I'm from Singapore." It just the utter ignorance of these people. I just thought of that when I listened to Wicker. And what is Traoré doing? He is nationalizing minerals and corporations to benefit the people in Burkina Faso. He's doing the very thing that Wicker is standing there scratching his head saying, "I can't figure out why these people aren't doing this."
Right.
Your thoughts, Erica?
Well, I mean, I'm sure it was Obama who told Africa to get over colonialism. So is it Wicker's fault?
This is still Wicker's fault.
I mean, his ignorance, Obama said it's, you're still crying about it all these hundreds of years. But I say that to say, even with, there's an ignorance, but I also think there's an intentional ignorance. They have to frame Traoré in a particular way, and Burkina Faso in a particular way, because they have to get a buy-in into that. In the last 18 months, even as we're watching what's happening in Gaza, we're also watching what's happening in the AES and how they have developed and built themselves step by step, and the process of that. And this is coming out of the attempts to have a mass understanding that what occurred throughout the AES were military coups, right? And that military coups are innately bad. Nothing good can ever come out of a military coup, even though we have examples like Hugo Chavez and Thomas Sankara, et cetera, right? But this is not to say that they all turn out to the benefit of the people, but it is definitely to say that they are all not innately bad. And so even with when they discuss Burkina Faso or the AES, they continue to say military junctures, right? They want to make it appear as if this is not the will of the people. And it very much is the will of the people. Nationalization is the will of the people. It has been the will of the people since Sankara. right? And the fact that they are getting back to this, and now the process of that is going to look like what the process of that looks like, because that is an internal struggle for Burkina Faso to figure out, and for the people there to figure out. But what I am insisting is that the process is happening, and what they, both media and the U.S. government, is trying to do is tell us, don't look over there, that's not actually happening. You know, what we're seeing is not really happening, because this is a bad man, and he's actually stealing the resources that should be going for the people, because they want to make it appear that self-determination is not a thing for Africa, which is why they can, you know, Wicker could say something as wild as he's said, right? To insist that just by happenstance, Africans just can't get it together, and nothing has happened to kind of curtail any of those efforts, including what Langley is doing now and what AFRICOM is doing now. There's no conversation about the way that AFRICOM impedes on the sovereignty and the attempts, right? We could talk about Somalia and what's happening in East Africa currently. So there is, they're playing a game, right? And we could say, yeah, it's ignorance, and I'm not going to pretend that the Republican senators and Democratic, even for that matter, are well equipped on African history, but they do have an understanding of their own end goal, right? So for them, this is not so much about whether or not Africa can rein itself in or take care of itself or dictate its future. It's about what is their role in the dictation of Africa's future. And the more that the U.S. sees itself pushed out, the more that we're going to continue to see this type of messaging that Africa cannot stand upright, right? And that it needs the U.S., that it needs a partnership to come in, and that the closer that it continues to get with China and Russia, we're going to continue to see the sort of yellow journalism and these particular narratives around the AES come out, especially as we're seeing more and more people become more attracted to the idea of an AES, that sovereignty could be possible.
You know, you said that coups are not inherently bad, and to that, and people might be listening and scratching their head saying, wait a minute, well, but what people have to understand is, to your point, who's behind the coup?
Right.
Is the coup a manifestation of the will of the people, basically overthrowing the colonial power, or is the colonial power, as who it was that just said this, that Wildflower said the puppet leaders in Africa all serve Western governments, is the entity behind the coup the Western government trying to neo-colonialize or recolonialize the entity? I want to say, was it Gabon or
yeah, it was Gabon. I was gonna make that as an example. If you look at
I'm channeling my inner Erica Caines. Go ahead.
I was gonna say Gabon because that happened at the exact same time as Niger. I want to say weeks apart, right? Look at the trajectory of Gabon today, and look at where Niger is today, and look at, there's a distinct difference in one is reflective of the people's will, and Niger is a large nation. Right. And I don't think that we understand, you know, how big these countries are. Niger is a very large nation. And again, there are internal processes and internal struggles that are happening because, you know, people have to be able to speak for themselves and deal with their own governments. But there is a very large distinction between what has occurred with the coup in Gabon and what has occurred in the coups that we've seen in the AES. And I think that when we look at these things and we look into these things, we can see that, yes, there are differences. There are differences, and these differences matter because they matter insofar as how it's being played out, where we're seeing the people's will being reflected in the choices that the governments are making in the AES, where Gabon has not moved an inch from where it was before the coup. And one can argue they might be in a worse position.
Well, in fact, was it Gabon where the leader of the coup, first of all, met with the United States State Department and told the State Department a week or 10 days before they had the coup that they were actually going to do it, and they had been trained by AFRICOM. the leaders of the coup, I think it was Gabon, had been trained by AFRICOM.
Well, here's the thing, and because that's something that came up even when Guinea, right? Guinea also had their coup
before Gabon,
before AES.
Right. Okay.
Right.
I'm thinking of Guinea. I was thinking of Guinea, not Gabon.
But that could be any number of African nations.
That's why I got confused.
Again, yeah, because the colonial imposition of Africa precludes that they're all going to get Western military training because there's no sovereignty, right? So the issue of Western military training has to be looked at as is, right? Case by case. Because we can also argue Sankara, even like I said, Hugo Chavez. These are cool. They were military trained by the West, right? But again, what does it look like is a reflection of the people's will? Because the issue of being trained by AFRICOM is not so much because that's by happenstance. There is no military government. You'll be hard pressed to find a military in Africa is not trained by the West, either Europe or the US, right? Or a combination of both.
Right.
Because of NATO forces. So even when we see that, I mean, even to say that, right? That I know that when Guinea happened, that was a knee-jerk reaction from the left here, that, they were trained by AFRICOM. But again, I think that also speaks to the non-engagement of Africa from the left, that there's a misunderstanding of how that actually happens and why that would occur. Because that doesn't really speak to why the coup occurred or what is happening after the coup, right? And we can look at Guinea and Gabon, and we can look at the AES, and we can kind of see what's bubbling in Chad. We can kind of see what's bubbling in Senegal, because they all have their own sort of political trajectories. And it's to say that we shouldn't look at them all as a one-to-one. Like, this is something because it happened here, like this is going to happen here, like this is going to happen here, like this. I do think there is a necessary need for deeper engagement with the continent, especially from the left, especially as we're having these conversations about what does it mean to have sovereignty, especially in the face of U.S. military and AFRICOM, right? Because primarily, especially in BAP, we talk about how these things boomerang back. If it is that they're waging war on the potential of a sovereign West Africa or a sovereign Sahel through the AES that has the potential to be a one united Africa, we could see that reflected in the ways they're waging war here with the same sort of mechanisms. What is the difference between AFRICOM and the 1033 program or AFRICOM and Cop City, right? And these are the ways that we need to start engaging these things, because for all of our political leaders, I mean, they lied on Malcolm, they lied on Martin, you know? So we have to have that kind of understanding in terms of what are we seeing and hearing about what is occurring in the AES, because the strides that they have made in just a matter of 18 to 20 months as a collective, which is why I'm always struggling with the way that Burkina Faso gets picked apart, because I think once we start doing that, we leave the door open for them to kind of pick apart the alliance. And it is an alliance, and the strength is in that alliance. And I have comrades who have gone on delegation there, and they could tell you would see flags that connect all three flags, one flag. Because they don't see themselves separate. So I do think it's important that even as we're engaging it, that we have that kind of understanding of why there's such a focus on Burkina Faso, as the West, militaries from Germany and Ukraine, etc., are trying to cross into Niger.
In fact, I want to get to some specifics about the alliance, but a couple of other points I want to just hit on really quickly. And one is you talking about the flags, and people need to understand that there's a huge difference between flag independence, which a number of African countries were able to achieve through their decolonization battles, versus true sovereignty and independence, where you're actually controlling your own economies, the control of your resources, thereby your own destiny.
Yeah, as Kwame Nkrumah explained, this is the process of neocolonialism, which is the highest stage of imperialism as he understood it. what we've seen post independence movements has been that the independence has been flag only, right? There's no real sovereignty. There's no self-determination. What we have seen, especially in the Sahel and parts of like Francophone West Africa, right? I think the appeal of what has occurred in the AES primarily has been the force in which they have, said, get out France.
Right. And
when we've seen the long capture that France has had, even post-independence, where the money and the stores and the businesses and everything is tied to France so strongly, and there has been a lack of sovereignty, and the fact that the people themselves push for France to get out, and this was one of the first things that these new governments had to ensure that they've done, because that was the will of the people. The people wanted France gone, and I think that speaks to a bit of that sort of neocolonial capture that we've seen post-independence. I also think it mirrors what we're dealing with here with the Black leadership class, because we could talk about the compradors. We could talk about how easily Africa has been captured and how they have misleaders, and they do. There's a plethora of them. I mean, we talked about Rwanda. We talked about, the Congo. There's a plethora of misleadership across Africa, but it's never understood. And at least how our misleadership is understood is never understood in that same way of a comprador class, right? And we understand a neocolonial body as being placed by the mother country or the colonial country to kind of be the overseers of what's happening with us. We should understand that that's the role of the Black misleadership class here. That is the role of the Congressional Black Caucus with us. Right. And for us to be misconstrued and think that they are on our side because they happen to be, Black like us or African like us, but on the flip have a sort of clarity around the same skin color of people on the continent are just innately bad, but here we can give them some grace, But I think if we understood what neocolonialism is, we understood that process of what compradors and the role that compradors play, we'd have a better understanding of what's happening to us here and how it's happening to them over there by the likes of a Susan Rice and a Michael Langley and a Barack Obama and Linda Thomas Greenfield and all these, Black misleadership figures who are eagerly going over there. What's his name? Gregory Meeks, who did the Russian, Malign Russians Act.
And Hakeem Jeffries with trying to convince CARICOM to back the play to be the Black minstrel face on the invasion of Haiti.
And then Kenya took it. Right. So we see these things as part and parcel. And I think because they see that here we're eyeing and we're paying attention to what's happening at the AES and with the AES so closely. Because for many of us, we didn't live through the independence movements of Africa, right? So for many of us, we only know that misleadership and comprador class. So to see something different, we're paying close attention to see where is this going to go, what's going to happen. And I do encourage people to have sober mind and sober analysis about all of this, right? Because we can't predict the future. We do not know what's going to happen. So I don't want to make any concrete statements around the future of the AES. We don't know. But what I do know is that they are fully aware that we are watching these things occur, especially, the African Stream did not get shut down just because. And much of the reporting African Stream was doing was out of the AES, was going to people, talking to the people in the street about how they feel about this new development and what do they think and what do they have to say about that. And then the African Stream gets maligned as Russian agents, right? Because they are in Niger and they're in Burkina Faso. They're in the AES. They're having the conversations and they're reporting live so that people can actually see it. And African Stream that has millions of followers on TikTok and hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter and Instagram gets shut down. Their Google gets shut down because they're reporting these things. Right. Because they're fully aware that we're watching what's happening. So then, yes, you're going to get BBC reports that Burkina Faso is anti homosexuality, and you're going to get reports coming out of AFRICOM from the AFRICOM general saying that that Traoré is stealing or misappropriating the resources. You're going to continue to get these particular reports to demonize the AES because we are watching what's happening with the AES.
And because the show is connecting the dots, you've got Wicker talking about, and Michael Langley talking about Traoré stealing the resources. Well, that's the very same thing they said about Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran in 1959, which resulted in the United States overthrowing Mossadegh and installing the Shah. How can Traoré steal his own resources? What he means is he's nationalizing his mining and he's taking his resources back from the colonizing power.
Yes. I mean, you could also say that with Pinochet. I mean, it's
right.
Anytime there's an effort, even in Peru, I think that the current crisis in Peru is a product of the attempts of the former leader who has been couped, the attempts to nationalize Bolivia, the attempts to nationalize. So I think anytime a country does try to move towards their own sovereignty, here comes the West saying not so fast. And I do think that's important to understand because they do it in these really critical. I mean, there's the hard and soft power mechanisms of the way of imperialism, of the way they go about these things. So I do think it's really important to really, really engage what's happening. And I think a good resource, like I named, is African Stream, obviously, because they're reporting directly out of these countries, but then also Burkina books, etc., just to get more information about what's happening, especially because, like I said, there's a lot of misinformation, primarily because it's all reported in France. And I begrudgingly refuse to learn French. So what you hear and what when they're different languages, I do think that creates a barrier, and it also allows for them to create particular narratives. But for folks who are genuinely interested in seeing how it develops, there's the ABS ABA imperialism group. There is the African Stream, like I named. There's a plethora of independent resources that folks can go to get more information.
Such as this program with brilliant guests like Erica Caines. Joker, thank you for that $10 super sticker. And let me see if I can get through this question. Erica, why is Diallo Kenyatta pushing the BS third way non-aligned movement line against Burkina Faso? Because they have a strategic alliance with Russia, and in parentheses, George Orwell.
Well, for my own peace of mind, I seldom pay attention to Diallo Kenyatta. But I will say, in terms of, because I do think that's a good question, just in terms of how people really engage the coup. The watching them turn from the West and turn towards China and Russia, I think that the way it's spoken about is paternalistic in the sense that they don't allow any room that, Africans have their own mind, or this partnership might benefit Africans, because these things don't have to be altruistic. We're not asking for us all to hold hands like a United Colors of Benetton commercial and say kumbaya, right? But I do think there's a way that it's discussed as if Africans do not have their own mind or their own objectives, or they're coming to the table with nothing, and that we're so easily bamboozled. Because what does that say about us? So when we have these conversations around China and Russia, and what's interesting to me especially is that the conversations had about Africa, China, and Russia are so distinctly different from the conversations around U.S. and Africa, the relations between U.S., because nobody's talking about the relationship between U.S. and Africa. Nobody is talking about why, since 2007, there has been an expansion in what now it's only 52 out of the 54 nations, because Niger told them to get out, and they never had a base in Eritrea. But we still don't know what AFRICOM is doing there. We still don't. We have an idea, but much of it is nonprofit work, like the NGOs. So and it looks different from country to country, but there's no conversation about what is the U.S. doing in Africa. Why is the U.S. in Africa? But there's so much conversation, which is U.S. media driven, around what the relationship between Russia and China and Africa, to the point that I made earlier about the ways that they're reporting. And this is not to say that this may not ever be a bill. I don't know. This is not to say that this won't ever be a law. But as it stands right now, it is not law in Burkina Faso. And the way that it is being reported is as if it is law in Burkina Faso. And how it's being reported is that it makes sense that it would be law in Burkina Faso because it's law in Russia. And Burkina Faso and Russia now have a partnership and dealership. So Burkina Faso obviously is just following Russia. And this is the way that it's being reported around any of the African nations. Even Mia Motley's most viral speech was the kind of pushback around the ways that U.S. media says that about the Caribbean and China, as if to say, us as African people, we can't think for ourselves. We have to be handled, because that's how that's the U.S.'s relationship, or the West's relationship with the rest of the world.
And Willie Hicks, thank you, makes the point. Absolute travesty that a black man with all those stars on his shoulder, supposing to have honor and integrity, but actually lying and disparaging another black man who is doing nothing wrong. And to the doing nothing wrong, let's look at what he's doing right, because there are a number, and I'm glad you brought up the point, 18 months, because how many decades was Burkina Faso a French colony? How many decades was Niger a French colony? So look, and so if you look at the abject poverty that the Africans in those countries had been living under, and then look at the progress that has been made in those countries just over the last year and a half. For example, Traoré has now invested in the Burkina Faso Airlines. What is it called? Oh, Air Burkina. 80% of West Africa air travel is controlled by foreign airlines. So what does he do? He invests in the airport in his country. He invests in expanding Air Burkina so that now they can capture the revenue from air travel into their country. That's just, I mean, I'm starting with that because there are a number of other projects that he's engaged in that he's nationalized mining. So now they can process those minerals in-house instead of sending them out of country at pennies on the dollar. Two examples, Erica.
And not only nationalizing the mining, but actually taking Canada to task. I don't know if you remember the incident that happened with the Canadian mining company, and they tried to leave. They tried to go back to Canada without that being resolved. So there has been big steps and changes, even to the point of Niger. I know when we've spoken about them putting France out, but the U.S. is still there. What to make of that? And again, this is to say that they are being strategic, or it appears that they are being strategic around what they're doing, right? And I think when we look at the U.S. and the AES and why that wasn't the initial next step, it was because they wanted to see, or they were dealing with the U.S. on their terms. And the moment that the U.S. stepped out of their terms, that was it for the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that says a lot about the ways that they are advancing the playing field, because they're putting themselves there right on it. And they say, no, this is an equal thing. We are not subservient. We're either going to have this diplomatic relationship, or we're going to have no relationship at all.
here's an example. And Kevin Baptiste, thank you so much for that $10 super sticker. How does Traoré and the rest of the Sahel nations put their sovereignty first?
Yeah, he said, how dare they?
Oh, I'm sorry. How dare? I'm sorry. I misread that. How dare Traoré and the rest of the Sahel nations put their sovereignty first? That's your point. That's your point, Erica. Is that the West looks at these Africans and says, who do these think they are? Taking control of their own resources. Another thing that stood out to me, and I read this story maybe 8 months ago, or maybe longer than that. It was shortly after Traoré took control, when they announced the story that Burkina Faso was going to start launching satellites, and they were doing this in concert with Russia. And I made the point that this is much bigger than satellites, because you have to understand the infrastructure that is needed in order to launch satellites. You don't just go to Satellites R Us and buy a satellite launching kit. There's an awful lot of technology transfer that has to take place in order for these satellites to be launched. So why is it, again, that Burkina Faso could be a colony for the number of years it's been a colony, and France didn't transfer this technology to Burkina Faso? The United States didn't transfer this technology to Burkina Faso. Canada didn't transfer this. But as soon as they get liberated, as soon as they take control of their destiny, these folks are launching satellites. And why are they launching satellites? So that they can look at the topography of the country, and they can use the imagery to improve agriculture, so that they can launch telecommunications and be in control of the telecom in their country. What's wrong with that? How dare they and the rest of the Sahel nations put their sovereignty first? Kevin Baptiste, homeboy from Oakland. I see you. I feel you. Thank you. Go ahead, Erica. Enough of my rant.
No, I mean, to the point, there has been a number of strides that's worth looking into, that's happening for the benefit of the people. And I think what we're seeing here is that point. How dare they benefit their own people, right? Because to your point of post or flag independence, we're always supposed to be subjugated people. Mm-hmm. We're always supposed to remain a colonized people. We're colonized here in the U.S. Mm-hmm. We're not supposed to be a sovereign free people. We're not supposed to have a liberated people. We're not supposed to do any of that. And we're seeing that in particular policies at play now. As we say that, we're seeing particular domestic policies at play now that speaks to that. But I think just more globally, when you look at the ways that not just African people, but I think colonized people the world over are not allowed their own sovereignty. And this is from China, China themselves, to Burkina Faso, to Iran, to Palestine. I mean, we can go on and on and on, but the Western hegemony sees fit to just continue expansion at the exploitation and the detriment of the colonized world. So whatever that looks like, or however that expansion looks like, that is the objective, and that is the main goal, and that is the focus. So, colonized people be damned. Whatever happens to us, happens to us. And we're seeing that play out. And we're seeing also, as Palestine is showing us in one way, and Burkina Faso and the AES is showing us in another way, that people are determining to take back their sovereignty and to live on their land by the means they see fit, what's best for them and their people, and not dictated by others or the West, or not continue to be subjugated or continue to be colonized. And that is what we're seeing play out. So even from Gaza to what's happening in Mali or Burkina Faso or in Niger, we're seeing these examples of self-determination. And I think those are the examples of self-determination, even though they are far and wide out, that they want to continue to kind of keep us disconnected from. To say, Traoré is a bad man and we shouldn't be looking over there because he's stealing. Or what's happening in Palestine, that's not a resistance front. They're murderers and they're rapists, etc. Right? We're not supposed to be inspired by these things.
My life, totally. Thank you for that $5 super sticker and that contribution. Thank you very much. Another element of this and tying Burkina Faso to Niger is Traoré is also developing nuclear power so that he can provide electricity not only to his country, but throughout West Africa, getting his uranium from where? Niger. So now Niger can sell their uranium on the open market to Burkina Faso. I don't remember how much they get per, I don't even know what the weight designation is that they sell it, but I know they were only getting something like $3 or $4 a unit. I'll just call it a unit. They were getting $3 or $4 a unit, giving it to France, where now on the market it's $100 a unit, and they can sell it to Burkina Faso as power plants are being built so that electricity can be provided to West Africa.
I think these are significant things. Even to the point where I said that, that I know I have comrades who do work on the Alliance of the Sahelian States. There's a project called the Thomas Sankara Center in Burkina Faso that has just opened up in Niger. And to your point, it is not just government to government, it is also people to people. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, people-to-people relationships and people-to-people conversations about how do we continue this? How do we expand on this? How do we grow from here? Because they are excited about this development and the potential for this development. And I think that needs to be emphasized, that the people have plans for this development. So it's not just a sort of government-to-government conversations that we're hearing or seeing take place as it relates to, the uranium, but also there's people-to-people organizing and discussions happening that I think is really significant for how these three governments are able to coalesce.
Norm Clement, I see $10 next to your name. Thank you. I'm not sure how that's being contributed, but thank you very much. I greatly appreciate that. Erica, I got a question here. Is this really just neo-colonial panic, or are we watching something deeper, a global shift toward authoritarianism using Africa as both a battleground and a warning? What is really happening? What is the world witnessing in this moment?
I mean, one could argue the Middle East is North Africa, right?
Right.
So,
yeah, well, the Middle East was a fiction, was a creation,
yes,
of the West, as Gil Scott talked about. They moved Egypt out of Africa and into the Middle East.
Right. And as my good comrade Rafiki Morris reminds us, that there was a time when one could not cross out of Africa without going through Palestine. Mm-hmm. So I do think, even if we sit back and we listen to Richard Medhurst's analysis and about the plans, Netanyahu's big plans, we can see that yes, Africa, whether north or east, right, with the water wars that are occurring, or even West Africa, is going to be the epicenter for much of what's happening in the world, which is why my comrades and I, especially on Hood Communist as a blog exists because the left has an Africa problem. The left does not really engage Africa to the extent that it would engage a Cuba and a Venezuela, etc. And I say that to say that there's a significant there's significant things happening on the continent that speaks so thoroughly and so broadly to the rest of the world. If we look at NATO, right?
Mm-hmm.
NATO's expansion into Africa. If we look at what's happening right now with Ethiopia, Eritrea, and the potential for 2 Somalias, like there are real things, especially if we're looking at the role of the UAE and all of these pockets of areas that are in the Western back. If we really take a bird's eye view, we really would understand the significance of Africa geopolitically right now, as we're seeing things unfold throughout the world. Because the major players that we're seeing in Haiti or in Palestine or messing with China are in Sudan, are in the Congo, are messing with the AES, so these are not separated things, but I do think imperialism will die in Africa.
And do you consider Palestine to be part of that position? Because because I just want to be sure. I don't want to put words in your mouth. because many are asking the question, why is the United States so wedded to genocide in Palestine? And the answer could be, and I believe a huge part of the answer is, because the United States sees that settler colonial project as being key to ongoing hegemony as it relates to the continent.
Yeah, the pipeline. They want to take that pipeline from Palestine. Actually,
you're breaking up. Oh, okay. We'll have to get Erica to log back in, because obviously you can see we just lost that. But folks, this is a great opportunity for me to take a moment and say to y'all, phenomenal analysis right there. Not a whole lot of not chatter, calling this out and calling folks out for what it is and for what they are. And this is why we need your contributions, and this is why we ask you to contribute to this program, to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We have set up a cheaper option of $5 a month, and if we can get 1,000 of y'all to commit to $5,000 a month, to $5 a month, we can make a huge impact. Erica, welcome back, and go ahead. You were talking about the pipeline from Palestine, and then the signal dropped.
Yeah, no, I had to charge my computer. I was watching it die. No, the pipeline that leads right into is Algeria. They want to, even with Nigeria, Algeria, okay. There's big plans in terms of what they're going to be able to do, connecting or at least cutting out China and Russia and having direct relationships in terms of control of these regions and that. So you can see that there's big plans, even as far as the Greater Syria, right? It even extends into Africa, like by way of Algeria, Nigeria, etc. So I do think it's really important to start to kind of look at and engage what actually is happening. Because right now there's the Somalia and Somaliland situation that's happening that is very tense. And I'm sure the West is all in that.
Well, in fact, I wanted you to talk about. Thank you for bringing. If you can, you give us a couple more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Because talk about what's happening in East Africa.
Oh, what is it? So I'm not going to position myself as the East African expert. Luckily, I am a member of the Black Alliance of Peace, and there's an Africa team, and there's a U.S. Out of Africa network. So much of what I know has been in these discussions and these deep conversations with Africans on the ground. But even to the point of what we're watching with Ethiopia, Eritrea, the two Sudans, which nobody at this point is questioning why they're two, even as we are speaking about Sudan. What's happening in the Congo, the West is deeply involved. I think at this point, the last 4 years have shown us that every president enters their presidency bombing Somalia.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing they do, literally the first 3 days or the first week, is a bombing of Somalia. Biden did it. This will be the second time around that Trump is doing it. Even the situation with Ethiopia is still unsettled, unclear. They're still attacking Eritrean sovereignty. But a lot of this has to do with the war, the connection to the water. Even as we talk about these pipelines, even as we talk about the Russia and China, much of this has to do with the controlling of the waters and controlling of the Red Sea.
And that's what's at the heart. Well, not at the heart. That's what is contributing greatly to the struggle in the West Bank and the struggle in Palestine, is access to water.
Yes. So yeah, that's what, for me, I see that Africa, including our North African cousins, being the epicenter of how we really start to understand it. Because I do believe imperialism would die in Africa, just like Zionism will see its grave in Palestine. And understanding Zionism as an offshoot and an offset of imperialism.
I was having a conversation with Dr. Radhika Desai, the economist, and I said to her that if you put it in its most simplistic terms, this fight between the United States and Russia and the fight between the United States and China is all about imperialism. And folks need to understand that Russia is anti-imperialist. Khrushchev was talking about the imperialists must die. The imperialists must die. We go all the way back to the 60s. And the fight over the Congo and Patrice Lumumba and how Russia was involved in all of that. Was that Khrushchev? Yeah. That was saying the imperialists must die. And the same thing with the conflict between the United States and China. China is anti-imperialist. And the United States is an imperialist country. Yeah. And when you look at the underlying crux of this conflict, it's imperialism versus anti-imperialism. And to your point, imperialism will die in Africa.
It will. And even to the point of East Africa, that would help us understand the stronghold of Rwanda and even Rwanda's role. Why is Rwanda known as the Israel of Africa? Why is Rwanda pushing so hard to be the Israel of Africa? And Uganda as well. So when we talk about these puppet states, Kenya, and these puppet governments, it is important to understand why they're, what role they serve in the larger analysis of what's happening in East Africa. Why are there Rwandan troops in the Congo? To support who? Who are they in bed with? Who are they doing business with? Why is Rwanda pushing for Israel to be a partner in the AU? And
joins us from the UK. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, and surprisingly, he gets deemed as the great Pan-Africanist, right? Because we get to muddle what these things are. If we look at the AES, we understand that is a product of a Pan-African project, because the project of Pan-Africanism is a political Pan-Africanism, or at least revolutionary Pan-Africanism, is a political project with the intention or goal of one united Africa under scientific socialism, right? So they're moving in that way, or at least at the start of it, where these people who are beholden to the U.S. and the U.S. government and to the West, and they do their bidding, but they get to say, I'm black, 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 or get to be upheld, right? So there's a reason, I think, why, I think for that point, why is Kagame praised and Traoré demonized?
Great question. To that point, where to go? Bridges CWR, Mr. Leon, this young woman is exceptional. Her content is on point. Kudos to Ms. Erica. She makes this quote unquote granny proud. Kudos. Well, that's why we bring her on the show, because Erica Caines is nothing but the truth. So again, when you look at East Africa and the West's involvement there, how do you see this playing? How do you see those conflicts, for example, in Sudan playing out relative to what's happening with the Alliance of Sahel states?
I think that's a good question. I think that's remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
Because even as we're discussing Africa as a whole, there is that tendency to break Africa apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot happening in Southern Africa right now too. A lot. Mm-hmm. It's just we don't hear about it, or that's right. Not. Yeah. And I think we're hearing so much about East Africa primarily because of the conflict in Sudan, but we're only hearing about Sudan. We're not hearing about what's developing in Kenya. We're not hearing about what's developing right now in Somalia, which remains to be seen. I mean, that's a very tense situation in Somalia right now, with the potential for a split. But I do think the way that we are focused, or refocused rather, by these sort of these specific interests. One of the arguments that I made around, we can talk about the way that people say there's a lot of focus on Palestine, but what about the Congo and what about Sudan? And I think for me, the organizing around Sudan and the Congo has been distinctly different from the organizing around Palestine, insofar as from inception, it was understood that this is a struggle for land, that this is a struggle against settler colonialism. And the way the struggle in Sudan and Congo continues to be depicted today is a human rights struggle. And we just talked about the way that the West understands rights, right?
Mm-hmm.
Earlier with the voting rights thing. And so because this is about a human rights struggle, it makes it more abstract. It does not make it concrete, right?
Mm-hmm.
It makes it to say, like, if we could just get these people food and housing, they still won't have sovereignty. They still won't have self-determination.
Right. They'll be well-fed. They'll be well-fed, housed subjects.
Right. And I think what we're seeing play out in terms of Palestine, and then to the extent of the AES, is that self-determination, is that taking back, is that struggle. And right now, that is not to say that's not what's happening in Sudan. I truly believe that's what's happening in Sudan in many different ways. But the way the advocacy for Sudan is happening, it pushes that to the back, right? So that nobody ever has to say, well, why is there a Sudan and a South Sudan?
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen?
Right.
Has that always been like that?
Right. And as I'm not going to butcher your last name, at Wilmer Leon, Erica is using all the correct terminology to help people focus their minds. Scientific socialism must be elevated to everyone's understanding of why these things are happening. And as you're joining us, I believe, from the UK, so I'm going to put you in charge of, yes, you're joining us from the UK. So as I'm putting you in charge of the UK and bringing everybody in the UK to this show, as that is my charge to you. That is your new responsibility. Go live long and prosper. You were mentioning South Sudan and Sudan, and we were talking about that whole conflict in the context of the Alliance of Sahel states. I wanted to also ask you, as this conflict in Palestine continues, and as Yemen or Ansar Allah continues to exert itself into the scene when you get down to the Gulf of Aden and whatnot, you're looking at Eritrea and Djibouti. And I'm wondering, do they get drawn in? Is there a possibility that they get drawn into this conflict because they're right across the strait from Yemen?
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody's got to control that waterway.
Yeah, I think
from the Red Sea into the Gulf of Aden.
In terms of Djibouti, the way that I understand it is that it is it's a country of military bases, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Everybody who's anybody has a military base on Djibouti. So I feel like and probably for that reason. They have ports and docks that need to be protected and all kind of things. So I do think at some point that there's a potential for that. I can't say Eritrea for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they have their own. I think they've been very smart strategically, the way Eritrea has been able to maneuver a lot of these politics that have been happening. So some of that remains to be seen. But I do think it is something to watch. And the more interesting thing is, this is something that coming into the Biden term, Kamala Harris mentioned about the wars for water or the water wars or potential for that. And I don't think people took that into consideration enough, because then we see the sort of dissipation or little pockets of turmoil begin to happen here.
Well, wait a minute. To that point, but she was on the wrong side of the argument.
Oh yeah, yes.
So she wasn't arguing. She was not highlighting the water wars in support of the Palestinians.
No,
she wasn't highlighting the water wars in support of Sudan. It was South Sudan that she was looking to back.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to point that out.
No, I appreciate that. Because I probably should have made that clearer if it wasn't. But I say that to say, even as she's saying it, there was not enough conversation or enough people paying attention to what does that mean as we're watching. So then Tigray breaks out, then Sudan breaks out. That so it's just like one thing after the next, right. And here we are now, as we can see these things happening. So I think East Africa, even for myself, there's a lot more that I need to look into and learn about, because I am fascinated by the development of how things have been occurring in East Africa with little to no fanfare from the left. And I think what's happening there is so significant, primarily because of the Red Sea. And if we're going to talk about Yemen and Palestine, I don't think there's any way that we can continue to leave East Africa out of that conversation geopolitically.
And folks cannot play Ansar Allah cheap at all, because those folks aren't joking. They when Al-Houthi said to Biden, please attack us, I said, whoa, hang on a minute, partner. He says, please attack us. We want this fight. And folks don't understand, they fought Saudi Arabia to a standstill. They fought Saudi Arabia to the point of Saudi Arabia came to the table looking for a peace accord, only to have the Biden administration tell them, no, you will not reach a peace agreement with these people because we're putting them back on the list of terrorist organizations. And because the United States, people need to scratch their heads and ask, there was an opportunity for peace between Ansar Allah and the Saudis. Why didn't we seize that moment? There was an opportunity in the Ukraine conflict for a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. The United States sent the British Prime Tony
Blair.
Not Blair.
Not Blair.
Tony, no, it was after Tony. It was Boris Johnson. They sent Boris Johnson into Ukraine to say to Zelensky, under no circumstances is the West going to accept a peace agreement at this time. Why not? So with that, Erica Caines, I have one more question, and you've been so gracious since many African nations are reclaiming their sovereignty, pushing back on Western control, is increased Western suppression on the agenda in these countries.
Yeah. I mean, again, to the point that I made earlier, they're fully aware of what we have become aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the things that they're targeting. And if it is that we're going to continue to advocate or see something like the AES develop and think to ourselves, what would it mean to create a liberated zone for our communities here? And then begin to move in that process of community control, liberated zones, that kind of thinking, then we should expect the repression. We just had an executive order that just ran down from the Trump administration about the ability to democratize individuals to become police officers and to strengthen the cops, right? But I don't want folks to look at that separate from, so what the hell did we think Cop City was supposed to be? Right. So we shouldn't be saying, oh, Trump is going to come in. I mean, you mentioned Ukraine. I remember the rollout for that. I mean, there's stations that don't exist anymore that was shut down from 2021. Mm-hmm. People have been pulled, the jobs have been lost. So I think anytime that we make an affront to speak out against any of these things, and we're taking these clear stances against the state's objective of expansion of Western hegemony, then we certainly should be expecting repression. We're seeing that in the West, in Europe, at least, with Richard Medhurst. We're seeing it here with my dear comrade, Musa Springer, who was just recently detained coming back from Cuba. We're seeing the students being detained or kidnapped, essentially. So I do think that we should be preparing for this moment, because so long as we continue to look at Palestine and get inspired, and look at the AES and get inspired, or look at Cuba, or look at Haiti, or look at the Congo, and look at these actual genuine struggles for self-determination, not wielded or led by the comprador class, but by the people, that we will continue to see more repression face us.
Erica Caines, you are such a treasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Such a wealth of information, and you will definitely get tired of me calling you and to get you on this show, as well as my Sirius XM show, which I'm gonna talk to you about. See if I can get you on for this Saturday. We'll talk about that offline. Anyway. I had to put you on blast because I got to put all the pressure on you that I can. Anyway, thank you, dear. We greatly appreciate it, and have a wonderful remainder of your day, and look forward to having you back.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, folks, thank you all so much. And again, Erica Caines, greatly appreciate it. Let me ask you all one quick question. Is this show worth one latte a week? Is this show worth a super mocha frappe with extra cinnamon and Muka Luka Kachuka milk, frothy with no foam? If it is worth that to you, if you could please, because that's about $5. If you could spare one of those a week and send that to us and commit that to us, we could do an awful lot with this. I mean, we could take this on the road. We could be bringing you this program. See, Willie Hicks, my man. Thank you very much for that $10 super. See, I knew if I asked him about his latte, Willie, that was directed towards you. Great, Willie Hicks. Thank you very much for that super sticker. Phenomenal firearms instructor, and he's also just opened up a private a security agency. So Willie Hicks, it's worth a plate of grits and gravy. Oh, absolutely. it's worth a plate of grits and gravy. So check out OPSEC, and Willie Hicks with his great work in the community. But with that all being said, folks, please follow, please subscribe. Again, if it's worth one latte a week, we could greatly use that one latte a week here. Share the show. To those of you watching on other channels through other outlets, please subscribe via the YouTube channel. We greatly appreciate that. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Nico House will be in the house tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Nico House joins us tomorrow. See y'all tomorrow. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.